In this video, we will discuss descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics allow us to learn and understand our dataset better, so it's an important part of data analysis. We start with some definitions. So data is a collection of facts and figures that you have collected, analyzed, and summarized for presentation and interpretation. A variable is a characteristic or attribute or quantity of interest that can have different values. For example, height is a variable which can have different values for people. And observation is a set of values corresponding to a set of variables. So each observation is basically a record about one of the entities that you're interested in. Usually the rows in a data set are observations and the columns are variables. And then each data set has some variations between variables, so you can have different values for different variables. And people have different heights, so that's some variation. And when we collect data, we are gathering past observed value or realization of a variable. By collecting these past realizations of variables, our goal is to learn more about the variations of a particular business situation. So here's a data set for Dow Jones Industrial Complex Index. And so as you see, we have 5 variables: company, symbol, industry, share price, and volume. And then each row basically represents an observation or record of the stock. And the columns are variables or attributes or features and so on. As you can see, we have 30 companies, Dow Jones Index, and then for each of them, you can see they have different share price, different volume, and different symbol. So that's where the variation is. So now let's take a look at different types of data. So when you collect data, you can collect data about the population, which is all elements of interest. But when the population is too big, it can get too complex to analyze. So we usually get a sample of it. For example, if you are trying to predict the outcome of presidential elections, your population is all the registered voters. So that's a population of interest. But you cannot possibly survey everyone. So then what the poll can easily do is that they select sample out of the population, such as a couple thousand people, and then you ask them who they are going to vote for and try to make a reference and try to make an inference based upon the sample. So the way you select the sample is very important. If you just go places such as New York or Silicon Valley and try to poll those people, and you obviously will get a biased sample. So you want a random sample that is kind of representing the population. And that can be tricky, as we have seen it in the presidential polls. Now, in terms of data type, usually work either with quantitative data or with categorical data. So quantitative data is any data that is both numerical and allows you to do arithmetic operations. So not every number is a quantitative data. So for example, if you have a height, you have weight, temperature, income, these numbers are numerical, and at the same time you can perform operations such as adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and the results will make sense. However, if you have group numbers, office numbers, or phone numbers, those are numbers, but it doesn't make sense if you subtract office numbers or add up phone numbers. It doesn't mean anything. So there are numbers out there, but they're not considered as numerical data because you can't really do numerical operations. The second type of data is categorical data. Anything that is not a number, such as yellow, like a color, or like gender, either female or male, or school year, like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and so on, is categorical. Some numbers can be categorical as well. So if you have group numbers are categorical. If you add them, subtract them, divide them, it doesn't mean anything. So good test to see if the numerical column you have is actually categorical is to calculate the average standard deviation. So something like average income makes sense, average number of children makes sense, but average group number doesn't make sense. So then doing any sort of statistic analysis or mathematical analysis doesn't make sense, then the numeric column is not numerical, it's categorical. Another type of data is data collected over time, which is called time series data. For example, if you basically collect data about S&P 500 index over time, that's what we call time series data. If you have a kid is growing up and you measure height over time, and that's going to be time series. Or X-ray of a patient taken at different points in time, that's time series data. So another type of data is cross-sectional data, which is data collected from several entities at the same time. So for example, you have different subsets of stock markets, such as transportation or technology and so on. So if you collect data at the same time, the subgroups would be considered as cross-sectional data. So in the table 2.1, I showed the stocks, and there are cross-sectional data as they describe the 30 companies that comprise the Dow at the same point of time, which is 2017. So here's a graph showing the time series data set collected over time from 2006 to 2017. It looks like it could be monthly based on the variation you can see in this chart. So in time series data, the same index was measured over time, and so this type of data is what we call the time series. So you can also see that the Dow Jones index climbed up to above 14,000 in 2007. However, the financial crisis in 2008 led to a significant drop in the Dow Jones index to between 6,000 and 7,000 by 2009. So since 2009, the Dow Jones has been generally increasing and topped 21,000 in 2017. And now it's like 35,000 in year 2021 amid the pandemic. Data come from basically everywhere. All these companies are collecting data about their customers or users, about their products and service, how they use as well. So sometimes you do an experiment to collect data. For example, if government want to see if a COVID test or COVID vaccine is useful, is effective, they do experiments. So you have a treatment group that gets the vaccine and a control group who doesn't get the vaccine, and you compare the results. How many people are getting infected with COVID in a normal living situation from each group. So then you have some control over what's going on. You can control several other factors. You can put people into groups. You can control age. You can have average of age. Then you can separate your people into young group and old group, and it gives you a lot of flexibility to control for other variables. Make sure they do not have an effect to the results and only the treatment. So most of them don't come from experiments though, the data. We have non-experimental data. For example, if we give people a survey to fill out and collect data, we don't really have control over what's going on. So that's what we call observational study. So this is an example of a survey for a restaurant when they filled out how are their surveys. So you usually for survey questions, you ask multiple questions and you use a scale. So in here you see a 5 Likert scale, which is very commonly used. And you allow people to select one of those options for each question.